Now let's switch over to AEW, although this does tie into WWE. This was another big story this week. And that is the status of one William Regal, who appears to be gone from AEW and on his way back to WWE. Now, there has been a lot of rumors and speculation all week long, especially since the angle they did with him on Dynamite about what his future would be in this company. Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful, many days ago, said that talent is of the belief that William Regal's AEW deal could be up in December of this year. And he said that this was also being speculated at last weekend's WrestleCade event. Mike Johnson, a PW insider, chimed in a few days later, saying all signs are that William Regal will be WWE bound very shortly. Although we have heard nothing official from the company, there have been rumblings within WWE of late about Regal returning in a backstage role. And Johnson posted an update this morning, actually right around the time I was getting ready to sit down and record this, that according to PW Insider, Regal is finalizing a new deal with WWE and is currently expected to officially start after the new year. And it is expected that it will be in a backstage role. And so then we get to this week's Wrestling Observer. And I know Meltzer has kind of been all over the place with this, but this was the update on the William Regal situation from this week's Observer. Said that this appeared to set up, when he says this meaning Regal helping MJF win at Full Gear. This appeared to set up Regal and MJF as the heel unit on top, similar to the 2021 pairing with Kenny Omega and Don Callis. It was said that when Regal signed that he had a 3-year deal. There have been a number of different stories, but the one said by somebody involved in the deal is that it was actually a short-term deal that is about to expire, and he is expected to be returning to WWE. Multiple WWE sources said Regal had an out clause in his contract. Actually, the returning to WWE is basically a given at this point, whether it was a short-term deal or Tony Khan let him out of his deal out of respect for him. There had been a lot of talk this past week regarding his future and a potential return, even before Paul Levesque tweeted a Regal clip from NXT talking about War Games from the past. Those in WWE noted that Levesque, when he started in WCW, that Regal and Terry Taylor always looked out for him and taught him, and that he will always take care of both of them if he has the power to do so. Stories were going around regarding his future this past week, which makes the entire pay-per-view finish confusing. The idea is to build a major program with MJF and Bryan Danielson for the championship, and MJF putting Regal out as the catalyst. And then he goes on here to say that he doesn't understand putting so much heel steam to the point of being the point man in taking the title from Moxley and helping to put it on MJF when they knew that he was gone in a few weeks. Apparently there was knowledge, at least on Tony Khan's part, that within a few weeks Regal was going to be out of the company. And he pointed out, then you had MJF pretending to turn face, but then turning back heel. And you had Regal turning heel for 2 weeks, but then the idea was that he's the sympathetic babyface for being hit in the neck with his own brass knucks. Look, there's a lot of Jekyll and Hyde here when it comes to some of the booking with Tony Khan and AEW, but you look at what they did here with Regal, and I can defend it a little bit in this way. First of all, MJF was getting these huge babyface reactions since he came back from a lot of the crowds. And then they leaned into it, right? The stuff with the Firm attacking him and him fighting back against the Firm. They wanted you to think that this guy was going to be, a big babyface. And that's what they were teasing. And then the pay-per-view came and we all realized that he's still the shithead that he's always been. And we've heard stories that MJF does not want to be a babyface. Apparently he told that to Chris Jericho and Jericho said, too bad, at some point you're going to have no choice. Because you're just going to be so over that the crowd is going to dictate that you need to be a babyface. And then it was funny in that post-show scrum at Brawl Out, Jericho, I think, made the comment that he told him, I'll teach you how to work babyface. I got you, don't worry. I look at what they did with Regal, and in a sense, it makes sense in this way. Even if Tony Khan knew that William Regal was going to be leaving the company, if I'm Tony Khan, I'm thinking to myself, how do I get the most out of this guy before he leaves? What can we do with William Regal to really make an impact and get out of him what we can before he goes back to WWE? And so they were telling this story on television for weeks, and they had that promo segment weeks ago with MJF and Regal that was so great. It was one of the best promo segments, I think, in the history of Dynamite. And MJF gave the backstory. It's almost like his villain origin story, talking about how, when I was younger and the emails and, I was suicidal after you told me that I wasn't good enough, and all of this stuff to kind of fill in the backstory for the MJF character. And if they wanted to keep him heel and make him the devil and make him this just unbelievable asshole, what better way than to use William Regal in the way that he used every other person in his career up to this point to get what he wanted? I made that comment the other night. I said, that's what MJF does. He uses people and he moves on. He did it with Cody Rhodes. He did it with Wardlow. He did it with The Firm by having them basically hand him the poker chip, which got him a championship match, and then he used William Regal to win the championship, and then when he did not need him anymore, he got rid of him. That makes sense for the heel MJF character. And then he bashes Regal in the back of the head with the brass knucks on Wednesday and leaves him laying, and they did this big serious injury angle. Bryan Danielson comes running out with one shoe on because he was caught off guard. He was in the trainer's room. And it was pretty clear at that point with Danielson running out and going in the ambulance with Regal, this was to set up an eventual match, probably for Revolution next year, with MJF defending the championship against Bryan Danielson. All of that makes sense. You can make sense out of all of that, right? It sets up MJF's first program. Regal was Danielson's mentor. He's trying to go for revenge for the Blackpool Combat Club, which is, it seems like it's all but done at this point. So that at least makes sense. The thing with MJF, teasing that he's a babyface and then he goes right back to being a heel, to me, it reminds me almost of what WWE did with Steve Austin in 2001. Steve Austin went heel at WrestleMania 17, which ended up, even though we got some entertaining television out of it, although we also got the what chant, which is the worst fucking thing to happen in that company in years. But later on in that summer, they built to one of the greatest moments in Raw history. The return of the old Stone Cold. It was actually quite amazing to look back on this because as much as there were so many things about that invasion I hated and they dropped the ball on. We got back-to-back episodes of Raw in the summer of 2001. I think it was the July 9th episode and then the July 16th episode. The July 9th episode was the night that Paul Heyman stood up from the announce desk and they did that little ECW reunion until they killed it at the end of the show by announcing that Stephanie McMahon was the new owner of ECW. But then the following week is when they did that show-long storyline leading into the Invasion pay-per-view, where Vince McMahon was trying to get Stone Cold to come back, the old Stone Cold, to lead the charge and lead Team WWF into battle at Invasion. And Austin wouldn't even listen to him. Austin was off in a bar somewhere, drinking and playing pool. And they had all but given up on the idea that Austin was going to come back. And then they did that segment where I think The Undertaker wheeled in classy Freddie Blassie in his wheelchair. And he stood up out of his wheelchair. And Blassie was, I don't know how old he was at that point, 70s, 80s. And he rose from his chair and he got everybody just all pumped up, right? It was this great little pep rally there. And I remember they cut to Austin, and he's watching this on TV back at the bar playing pool. And you could see, the conflict in his head about what he should do. And I remember he threw the pool cue down and left, and you hear this eruption in the arena, because they know, right, he's on his way back to the building. They built that so perfectly. When the glass shattered and he came out, it's one of the all-time great reactions. And here he's stomping down to the ring. Jim Ross is losing his mind. He's giving stunners to anything that moves. It was this great moment, only for them to completely undo it at Invasion when he went right back to being a heel and he cost Team WWF the match. And it took the air right out of the fucking place. Right? They had the old Stone Cold back. That's what people wanted to see, and they just turned him right back heel. Now, I'm not putting this on the same level as that, right? Because that's an all-time fucking angle right there. But it does remind me of that, where you clearly can see the fans wanted that new version of MJF. They wanted him to, if not a babyface, more of like an Austin-level tweener. And then they said, no, we're going to keep him as a heel, right? And I think it did take the wind out of the sails of the fans a little bit. He probably has more opponents as a heel than he does as a babyface. But, as far as Regal goes, it sounds to me, the likeliest scenario, I think, because it's very weird to think he has a short-term deal. The guy just signed with them in like March, February or March. What did he sign? A 9-month contract? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. I think the likeliest scenario is that he had a multi-year deal, or maybe it was for a year, but he had an opt-out clause. Maybe with the idea that if Triple H did come back, even if it was just to run NXT again, that he could leave and go back and work for him and work for his friend. And now he's exercising that opt-out. Ric Flair had a handshake agreement with Vince McMahon after he signed with WWE that, if at any point he was demoted down the card out of a main event spot, he could go back to work for WCW. And Vince McMahon honored that deal. And Flair, did the job for Mr. Perfect on his way out. There was some sort of, not a non-compete, but he wasn't able to actually wrestle for a period of like 6 months or whatever it was. So he went back to WCW, but he was doing a talk show segment, a Flair for the Gold, for months. But Vince let him out, and he went back to WCW. It was a gentleman's agreement. But the idea that Regal would have even thought to ask for that would have been almost inconceivable given where we were at the beginning of this year. Triple H suffers a near-fatal heart attack last year. Vince McMahon almost completely dismantles Triple H's entire team, including, he kept a few people like Shawn Michaels, but even Regal, right, he got cut. And now we see how things turned out. Not only did Triple H come back, he got Vince McMahon's job, which nobody could have predicted would happen the way that it did and when it did. Years ago, of course, yeah, Triple H, he's the heir apparent. It's going to be Triple H and Stephanie taking over. If you would have asked me that question 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have been like, of course, yeah, that's how things are going to turn out, right? It's only a matter of when, not if. Didn't look that way over the past year. And then you look at the way things turned out. Who knows? They've been friends for decades. Maybe Triple H gave Regal a heads up and said, hey, don't count me out just yet. Don't stray too far. We just don't know. We don't know for sure unless Regal comments publicly on things. Maybe he will at some point because he's got a podcast, so everybody's got one. Maybe at some point on his podcast he'll comment on this. He doesn't strike me as the kind of person who really shares a lot of kind of inside baseball stuff on his personal, contract status, but maybe at some point he'll comment on this. But of all the crazy, insane stories that have happened in wrestling this year, it's like, why not add one more to the pile, right? William Regal is fired by WWE. He's hired by Tony Khan to come work for AEW. And before the year is even over, he ends up back in WWE. You gotta put this on the list with everything else that happened this year. That's just batshit crazy. Regal in a behind-the-scenes role as Triple H's right-hand man, like what Pat Patterson was to Vince McMahon. That makes sense. Almost like his consigliere. That's kind of how I think Regal is going to be for Triple H. He'll be his Pat Patterson in effect. But Regal was also the one general manager that I never got tired of seeing because we didn't get to see him all that much. He was the perfect general manager in NXT. As sick as I was of all the GMs and the GM concept on the main roster, that's the one GM that I never got tired of seeing. So the idea that they would make him a main roster GM is very appealing to me. If Triple H is going to do a draft, he's probably going to do his very first draft coming out of WrestleMania. I still don't know what the point of the draft even is when you have so much crossover back and forth between Mondays and Fridays. It seems kind of pointless to me, but I guess people get excited about it. So if he's going to do a draft, I think it would make sense to actually have a GM for each show. With their own war rooms, and they can, make trades during the course of the year. If that's the case, Regal would be the perfect person. I don't know if he wants that. I don't know if he wants to be on TV. I don't know if this, opt-out or whatever it is with him leaving AEW means he can't be on TV, but he can only work behind the scenes. That I don't know. But him as a GM for Raw or SmackDown, I think would be fantastic. Now, Brian Alvarez was speculating this week that Regal may also want to go back to be in Florida and not have to travel. And maybe that's one of the reasons why he wanted out of AEW. But he was traveling a lot to independent shows for WWE to scout talent. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. He almost makes it sound like Regal was just stationary in one place in Florida at the PC. How many times do we see pictures of him or hear stories that, oh, Regal was spotted at this independent show. He was spotted at PWG and Evolve and all. I mean, it's not like he wasn't traveling. How much was he traveling for AEW, for God's sake? He was traveling once a week. It's not like he was on the road all the time for AEW. So that to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense. His real value, in all honesty, as much as I'd love to see him as a character on TV like a GM, his real value may be in talent development. Now keep in mind, his son also wrestles for NXT as Charlie Dempsey. And you can tell just by taking one look at this kid. You can't not see William Regal when you look at his face and the way that he wrestles. It's pretty clear whose kid he is. Maybe part of it is that he just wants to be around his kid to help in his development. Maybe in the end it all comes down to family. But AEW's loss is WWE's gain. Just like WWE's loss at the beginning of this year was AEW's gain. Now the script has been flipped.